Svitlana's smart moves once again with Svitlana Demchenko. What a surprise! It is you, the name giver of the show. Are you going to show us some opening?
Yeah, I will. Today we will be looking at the King's Indian defense.
Wow. Okay.
It is one of my favorite openings. So I've played it for many years, and I think it's a very fun one to learn as a weapon against first move d4.
Okay. Well, I'm super curious. I'm so happy to do those opening shows, to be honest, because, well, I've never in my life touched the knight going to f6 ever after d4. I think
you know what I do? I have, like, if I sometimes play online, I have knight f6 pre-moved, which is why I have so many Alekhine games too, because I just sometimes have it pre-moved in bullet.
Yeah, I guess this is actually, you're so right. This is the reason why there is so much Alekhine in bullet games, actually. Yeah, funny. Yeah, there's not much damage which can happen after knight f6, also, except that you're going to the Alekhine probably. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this because now I'm learning something new. That's what I wanted to point out. I would never touch this opening on my own, so yeah, let's go for it.
It is a very big opening, so it can be hard to know where to get started. It's very huge. The theory there's a lot of it, but today we'll do a bit of an overview of what some of the main ideas are. So it starts with d4, knight f6, c4, and the pawn goes to g6. So this is the King's Indian. If we were to play pawn to e6, that would be more of the Queen's Indian or Nimzo setups. But this is very, very different. And the setup will be with the bishop on g7 and with the other pawn on d6.
Sorry to already interrupt you, but there's like Indian defenses are normally the ones where the knight is going to f6 after d4, and then there's all those variations. But the King's Indian, this is precisely this move order, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the King's Indian is categorized by these two pawns being here.
Thank you. Okay.
And this bishop being on g7. So white doesn't have to do all of this expansion with c4 and e4, but this is how people usually react to the King's Indian. So, I mean, on move 2, they can easily play something else. But the good thing about the King's Indian is that it's a setup that can be played against pretty much anything. It doesn't matter if white does something strange, let's say some b3, we can still do the exact same setup. Of course, the theory will be different. Maybe some minor plans might change. But overall, the King's Indian is quite adaptable to anything that the white side can do. But we will look mostly at the main positions that occur, which is white taking control of the center, which we gave to them in the first few moves, and trying to play like this in the center, keep their space advantage. And there's many lines for white. White can do, this is the main King's Indian position. White can do 4 pawns attack. White can do the Semish variation, which would be f3. There can be a fianchetto bishop with g3. This is also fairly common. Yeah, so there's many setups here. The most common move is knight f3, so we'll go with that one. Then we castle. This is the most typical King's Indian move. You will pretty much, if you're playing it online, you can pretty much pre-move all of these. Just make sure there's no like e5 anywhere.
Or a
all of these are pretty much standard, and none of this changes. Then white can develop with the bishop and also try to castle short. So whenever white castles long, those would be different sort of setups, and the plans would change a bit because it does matter where the opponent's king is. But the long castle is rather rare. That's only in some maybe Semish lines or in some more offbeat variations. But usually white will castle also short. So here there is a very typical pawn break for the King's Indian. Do you think I know which one I'm talking about?
I well, it's no, because it can either be e5 or c5, but I'm not sure which one it is.
Right. So those two are very common in the King's Indian. Usually, whenever we're talking about the main lines, so such as this one, it will be e5.
Mm-hmm.
c5 would be in different, in some other variations and can appear because that's the only other option. But e5 is the most common one for this main line of the King's Indian. So one trick that I have, not really a trick, but just a bit of a change in move order that I have, is that sometimes if you, let's say you really want to avoid endgames and you don't want white to take, because if they take, you will take it back, and there is this opportunity for white to trade queens and play this endgame. So there's nothing wrong with this endgame for black. Actually, it is equal, which is a good outcome out of the opening. But I would understand why some people just wouldn't really like to play this. And I was also one of those people for a while. And so on move 6, we will have to go for e5. That's a plan that's crucial to the King's Indian. So here I would go knight to d7.
Oh, avoiding the queen's trade.
Right. So there is never e5 for white. Well, here, this might be like the one and only option where maybe you can calculate e5, but white will never play it on their own because they have such a beautiful center. They don't want to ruin it. And if they play e5, they will end up losing that pawn somehow. So basically they will castle, and now you play e5, and that's kind of my point in this move order, that you avoid this one line with the queen trade. Now if they take, you're not going to take back with the knight and do the same thing. You will take back with the pawn, and then now there's no queen trade. You can play c6 next, and
interesting.
Rook to d8.
So this keeps a little bit more of the tension in the middle game. It looks out to open, have some little more influence on tactics, and but if you're very, very good with endgames, you would probably immediately play e5 and go like, hey, well, we can swap a lot of pieces because I'm very happy with this setup.
Right. Yeah, some people like it. Or also the other factor is that white, it's not the most popular response from white, right? Because they could also have a more have more space in the center and push with d5, and this is actually where most of the main lines happen. Because white can also doesn't want to be unambitious and go for this equal endgame, because they would want more space and they want some more attack. So that's why for some people it's a big concern that this endgame is possible. For others it's not, because it will only happen rather rarely. But anyway, so d5 can happen either right away, after which we're going to take the c5 square with our knight, which is one of the main plans. So the move is a5, so that there's no b4 preventing our knight from going there. And then the knight can come there, either d7 or a6. Both of them work. And then the knight will eventually come here, and that's how the game can continue. Now, there's one more setup. I don't want to overwhelm and give a lot of them, but there's one more setup where white does here after e5 is they castle. And we're going to look at a training game, not a training game, like a model game for the King's Indian, after which will be in this line. So the difference between the knight d7 line that I said and this one is that if you want to go for the e5 immediately, which is the main line, now you have the option of putting your knight to c6, and this kind of provokes the opponent to do something about this pawn. So most people play d5 and take up more center, and then our knight goes to e7, and this is one of the main lines of the King's Indian, and we will look at a like training game, at a model game with it.
Interesting.
But maybe one thing that I didn't mention is why can white not take this pawn?
Well,
right?
I actually wanted to ask you this, but then I could figure it out on my own. I just think that taking on e4 is working, right?
Exactly. Maybe we take on d1 first, but I don't think
see.
it matters. So yeah, let's say this and e4. There's always some tactics. So the reason why e5 works here on the move 6 is that white doesn't really want to take it. There's a tactic that wins back the pawn, and it's not really a good trade for white to do.
So,
but anyway,
yeah, let me quickly say something like exactly this position. So, I mean, I've seen this a couple of times already, and every time I see it, I'm like, oh God, I would like to be white here. And as white, I like to play against the King's Indian too, because first of all, I like to push pawns, which is of course not like the greatest trait in the chess world, but I always get a very nice attack. I even get a king attack on the king side, which I love that.
with white?
Yeah, with white. So so I have always the feeling like, oh, there's so many squares which are occupied for black, and like this knight on e7, of course, it fulfills its purpose probably sooner or later with the f5, which happens pretty often in some games as far as I remember. But like the bishop, everything is like blockaded, and I think I have like this feeling, there's a word for it, claustrophobic. Yeah, probably. And
so that there's not a lot of space.
Yeah, and I think I like space in chess, and this is why I mean, this is what you have to figure out after all, I guess, whoever is watching. Yeah, but how is, this is the question I want to ask you. You like to play this. How do you feel about this? You do not have a claustrophobic feeling, surely, because you probably know the right moves, how to continue, which are always working.
We can talk about the typical plans here for both sides, because that's also important to know it for both. So when you look at this pawn structure, so this can apply to other openings as well, but this one especially occurs in the King's Indian. So just this pawn structure, we don't even need to have the pieces, because it's if you just focus on the pawns, so only plans with the pawns. What do you think white's plan is?
Well, I guess the normal plan is to give a bit more pressure on the queen side, because it just looks like, I mean, this is the reason why we also played a5 earlier, to prevent b4, exactly, c5. I really like that.
Right.
My plan is different when I have a situation like this. Normally I'm castling long, by the way, but that's a different story. But sometimes I also castle short, and then I'm pushing g3, f4, and stuff like that. But
I would think that's a bit dangerous to do for white when your king is here. So f4, usually, whenever that happens, then this nice bishop opens up. And so I think black would, if they're well prepared for it, they would be happy with it. So white's plans are b4 and c5, like you said. And this is kind of like a battle of the two pawn chains. So white hits the base on the queen side, which will be the pawn on d6. This is the one that they will always attack. And black will target the e4 pawn with f5, like you mentioned. This is always a plan in the King's Indian, especially in those close positions. There's black will always just go f5. So white's attack is founded on gaining material on the queen side. So they might try to win a pawn somewhere. Maybe the pawn on d6, maybe the pawn on a7 sometimes falls. But black's attack is going to be on the king side. So black's aim is to create a mating attack against the white king as quickly as possible. And the white king will often castle short. So that's why I was a bit surprised when you said that you get a mating attack as white, because it's usually the other way around.
It's chaotic and it's open battles, because as I said, the f5 is almost always happening, and then there's like there's absolute chaos on the board, which is nice. Because it looks like black has this beautiful defense, but it actually, the King's Indian is the opposite of a defensive opening, right?
It's a very aggressive opening because
So weird.
your whole aim is to checkmate the opponent as fast as possible, and it's white who's playing for more positional
Yeah.
plans on the queen side and creating weaknesses and all of that. So
Hmm.
so it's a very aggressive opening, and any King's Indian player is probably someone who likes to attack and who likes these kind of messy positions. Yeah, some of the common players who have played it. It was Fischer. I think he was one of the big players who really liked it, and we know him as a attacking player. Kasparov for sure has played it. So if you look at the types of players who have employed it, it's mostly really attacking players. So that's how you know it's not the most defensive opening you can think of. So do you want to look at a game?
Yeah, let's take a look at this model
would
game
model
you mentioned.
That would model how to play here. So this one is this is between Wesley So and Hikaru. And this one is one of the, I mean, in my opinion, it shows all of the plans of the King's Indian defense from the black side. So this is one of those rather rare cases in recent years, where white is going for such a main line full of theory. So a lot of it was theory. But of course, it's very, very deep. And for someone who is playing the King's Indian their whole life, they would have to have encountered it at least once. So a lot of it will be theory, but it's still some ideas that we can learn from it. So it starts off with the center taking from white. So white is going for the main.
And white is Wesley So and black is Hikaru Nakamura.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that he loves to play the fianchetto. I mean, he also makes just g6 very often. I remember that too, yeah.
Yeah, so we're going for the exact same setup that we just looked at. And now he goes for the immediate e5. Castles. Now the knight comes here. So this is kind of forcing white to make a decision in the center.
Yeah.
If he wants to allow us to take on d4, that's also possible. And that's a complete different set of lines. That's the thing. The King's Indian, there's just so many different subsets of lines. And that's why it's such a huge opening to learn, which is why whenever I teach it, I just teach it based on ideas and not as much based on actual lines, because if you try to learn all the lines, you can just go crazy and forget them and mix them up.
Yeah.
So
excellent.
If you remember main ideas, that's what works best for every like opening that's setup based, which is the King's Indian. So we're in the main, one of the most main lines in the King's Indian that even exists. So now white plays knight to e1. So first of all, what do you think are the plans for both sides now? Why did the knight even go to e1 in the first place?
Well, I mean, it seems that either f3 or f4 is in preparation, and the knight can jump to let's see, I guess d3 maybe, and take a nice path for c5. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So the knight e1 is one of those common moves for white because it will go to d3, supporting a c5, and also it frees up the way for the pawn to go to f3. So it's not going to be
f4 because of as the much. Bishop you mentioned already, that it has this nice diagonal. Yeah.
So f3 just to secure white's pawn chain, because they anticipate that f5 will be happening. So what about black? What do you think black will be trying to do?
Yeah, so I guess the black might also make a knight move and kind of have the same idea. Yeah, exactly. It's I mean, are there variations where the knight goes to e8? I'm just thinking it doesn't.
Yep.
Yeah, I've seen it too.
These two are both like common lines.
I think d7 is more common, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I like d7 too because you're adding another protection to c5, and it just looks a bit more active. It has a bit more options here. But e8 is also possible, also has its own ideas, that it's defending our pawn chain and that it's
I see.
Holding it in place solidly. But knight d7 is more common. And black's plan is just to roll the pawns on the king side and open it up there, and that claim that we have more pieces there and that our attack will be stronger. So f5 always happens. That's the most important plan to memorize for the king's Indian, that you move the knight and then play f5. So the knight doesn't always have to move to d7. Like I said, it can go to e8. Sometimes it can go to h5, which is also very common. But here was not possible because the bishop was currently defending it, which is actually, that might be one of other reasons why the knight goes to e1 so early. But knight h5 plus knight h4, knight f4 is also a common route for the knight. But anyway, we're in the main line right now, which goes with f5. So bishop went to e3. Once again, white is trying to keep up with the c5 plan. So now as black, we have an option. What to do with our f5 pawn? What happens next? So do you want to, I'll give you three options. Do you want to trade it on e4? Do you want to push it forward with f4? Or do you want to keep it the way it is? Rank them from your best to worst. What do you think?
Wow, that is such a good and difficult question. Quickly for you at home, by the way, if you're watching it already since a while, thanks for that. Thanks for the likes from the last video. I counted them. It was more than usual. Thanks. That helps a lot always, because due to the algorithm, people find us now on YouTube much more often. So look in the description. There is a link with the board, and you can replay it. And we will have this particular game there too, which you can replay, take a look at, and yeah, take a deeper look into the King's Indian, because Svitlana's Smart Moves is all about learning chess or making smart moves. Good. I dodged the question. I hope you were forgetting that you were asking me 3 questions. So I think, and I might be wrong, but they're all 3 options are playable, kind of. I think if you push, then you will, to f4, then you will push h5, g5, g4, and open the line for the bishop on c8, with knight going back to f6 maybe, which is nice. I prefer this the most, I guess, because I'm a pawn pusher after all. Taking opens the line, which, will get rid of a couple of pieces, I believe. Maybe also, the knight.
We can think about white taking with the pawn or also with the knight. And usually this type of transformation is not the best in the King's Indian. It usually favors white, because if you can see now, for example, this knight can have an outpost, which is not really something that you ideally want to allow, and your pawn pushing potential kind of dies out because you don't have as much of a majority there anymore. So this is why I would probably put this as the worst option and f4 as the best option, which is also what you prefer.
So what happens if you just leave the piece there? Because I just have one little problem, is what else shall I move here? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So that's the other thing, is that you will eventually have to play some f4. You will have to do something with that pawn. You can, the other option why it's not bad either is because you can just bring more of your pieces to the attack, because you already are planning to play f4. But it's just about bringing more pieces. Maybe you play some knight f6. Maybe the knight will go to h5. Maybe you want to play some h6 move or g5, something along those lines. But you never want to take on e4 anyways.
Yeah.
So that's why we are even pushing it here in the first place.
Okay, so the bishop probably has to go back to f2. Yeah.
Right. Now g5 follows up, like you mentioned. We're pushing all of our pawns that are possible, and this is this is still theory for people who play the King's Indian a lot. And it does go on for a while. So you see all of the squares that I do are like lighting up as blue, which means that it's theory. And it takes, it's a while to actually memorize them. But you already know the idea that what black is trying to do is just to push pawns here and bring more pieces in for the king attack. So now white played c5. Do you think it is ever good for us to take on c5, or will we kind of ignore what white is doing on the queen side?
I mean, there's too many pieces on c5 now, so white will definitely get an advantage by opening up the d file. If we take, I would definitely not take and just leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good answer, and that's exactly what we do in the King's Indian. Essentially, our plan is just to ignore whatever white is doing there,
which is good,
and you go all in on the king. So, you know, it's very rare, unless there is a exchange in the very beginning. It's very rare that you see like a King's Indian endgame that that comes from this type of pawn structure. It's because either black is going to win fast against the king, or black is going to lose fast because they lost everything on the queen side. So it's usually a very fast-paced opening, and you want to start the attack as quickly as possible, or else the opponent's ideas will be faster.
Okay.
So the game continued with rook c1. Now, this next move, I will not make you guess it, but it might look strange, rook f7, but it's a very, it's still theory, and it's very like deep move in the sense that it protects everything here on the 7th rank, just in case, you know, something opens up here and there's the knight coming to c7 or something like that.
Yeah.
So the rook is super useful here. Plus, this also gives us future ideas for the rook to be on g7, which is one of the other reasons why the rook goes here, is that it can sometimes join the attack on the 7th rank better than it can on the 8th rank.
Nice.
So that's why this move is made, mainly to do both the defensive role and maybe a bit of an attacking role. King h1. What's our next plan for black?
h5.
Right. So here you don't even have to think much. That's the only other pawn.
I seem to like this opening much more because you do not have to think that much. You just push everything forward and checkmate the white king. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully if white allows that, that would be great. The opponent might try to do something about it and prevent it. But that's also the thing. If white tries to play something like h3 or g3, you can also think about how that might be weakening. So although it prevents your immediate plan, you might also have some new sacrifice ideas with like bishop h3, or with opening up some files here if they play something like g3. So usually playing on the king side for white is not good, and playing on the queen side for black is also not good, because you're playing into the opponent's hands and you're kind of wasting time on the side of the board that isn't really your advantage.
I'm learning so much today again. Thanks, Svitlana. You're really, really good in explaining all of this. Okay.
Thank you. And I really like advertising the King's Indian. That's one of the
you have a
things
contract
I really
with the king.
So both players are pretty much following their plans. Knight went to g5. White is playing on the queen side and trying to create weaknesses, attacking the pawn chain base, which is d6. And black tries to mate the opponent's king as fast as possible. a6 to kick the knight a bit. Now knight a3, I think this was the novelty here, where both players kind of had to move away a bit from theory and already start to think on their own, because theory can't go forever. So how would you play here for black? So this next move is maybe a bit unconventional based on what I've been saying, but what would you play?
Well, I think because I thought about an unconventional move anyway, which is bishop f8. I would go with the rook to h7 and g4 that was my idea. But it is
Okay,
something else, right?
it is something else. It is another move, and the reason why I said it's unconventional, it's because it's actually on the other side of the board, which is not what we normally do.
So that I see. So that is b5 then, because it
Yeah,
stops knight going to c4.
yeah. So you sometimes, despite this opening being very attacking on one side of the board than the other, you also sometimes might want to stop and think, what is white doing? And is there an
Yeah.
easy way to kind of prevent what the opponent wants? And the opponent obviously wants the knight on c4, and it will be a really nice square for it. It will go to b6, and that might be a bit of a problem later on, which is why you can kind of break the conditions here and play something that you normally wouldn't play. So you wouldn't play this if the knight was on c3, right?
Sure.
Because that's kind of playing into the opponent's hands, and they have a4 pawn break. But just only because the knight is on a3, this move was possible. So that's why there are sometimes exceptions, but for the most part, this game is a really good demonstration of what normally happens, because both sides are playing how they're supposed to play.
Yeah, a really perfect model. Or as you call it, say in German, a Musterpartie.
Yeah, so now is kind of a moment where you might have to start calculating, or you might think, what is my attack lacking? Because it's not yet breaking through completely. So all the time, whenever you see the bishop here and the pawn here, you always think about g3 type of moves.
Yeah.
This was also possible here. It's not what happened in the game, but I would definitely be considering that. And you always should consider that, because that's one of the main reasons why what your pawn chain is trying to do, and you're trying to open up the files here. So he played queen f8, which is another benefit of that earlier move. But these are all like really deep positional kind of moves, and you wouldn't have to play exactly like Hikaru to be a good King's Indian player. So there's always different ways to play it, but overall he's following the right plan. So now the bishop on c8 was being attacked, and it moved to d7. So one of the important things is that this bishop is super good on this diagonal. We don't want it to be fianchettoed, because it's
yeah, that doesn't help
looking
anyway.
towards that pawn chain, which does nothing for us. So the bishop wants to stay here, and another reason for that is if we ever play g3 and they play h3,
bam,
we are going to take it, and there's going to be some tactic happening. But on the other hand, imagine that we, I don't know, traded that bishop. Let's say we traded this bishop for this bishop right here. Then whenever we play g3 and they reply h3, you kind of have no way to break through.
Yeah.
So this bishop is super important in the King's Indian. And if you're ever, it might not seem like it in the beginning, because the bishop isn't even being developed. But in the long term, this is a good guarantee that white doesn't just close up the position and you have nothing to sacrifice.
Yeah, this is, of course, a very important thing you're just mentioning. Yeah, it can happen that there is one wrong pawn move, as it is so often in attacks in the openings or in the middle games, and then everything is closed up, and then out of a sudden you have to take care of the other side where there has where some progress has been made, and I believe that is something which white has to take care of every now and then.
Yeah, if white stops the attack on the king side, then it will be very hard to play the rest of it, because then only white's attack will be happening on the queen side. So now we just keep improving pieces. He played a really nice looking move, bishop h6. So you were mentioning how the bishop is cramped and that it's looking at its own chain of pawns. But now on h6, it is definitely preparing for this g3 pawn break. And it will be opened up really nicely. And the point is that white cannot ever play some h3 or h4. So there's nothing to be prevented for them. So white removes the bishop from the potential g3 moves with a tempo. And how do you continue the attack next? Because g3 now doesn't come with a tempo.
Sure. Very interesting.
We can still play it though, I feel like.
But well, I'm looking at h4 right now.
Yeah, that's the most.
Yeah, that's a good.
That's a precise attacking move, and that's what he played in the game. And you are offering white the chance to take the pawn on g4, which is what happened in the game.
So now it's the question.
Now is another question. This actually turned out to be a mistake.
Well, it looks as if it can quickly turn into a festival of exchanges now quickly. So
you want to take here?
Yeah, if I want to, I mean, I'm looking at this beautiful spot on e3 with my knight. And I think that is the main idea. But of course, then there is rook takes f7. Then the queen can go to c7. And then...
That is true. Yeah. And the attack is a bit slowed down because now there's queen trade that can happen. And queen trades are not really good for a King's Indian player with black. So we can think of other alternatives from this massive trades option.
Oh, I didn't even see that e4 is also, but that looks too dangerous. I mean, e4 and then knight takes e5, right?
And the knight can go to like even c5, f2. It's recommending knight f2. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a dangerous place.
Yeah, although I like knight to g3 next, but that's just me personally going into super awkward. But actually, it is quite nice. But yeah.
Yeah, so knight e4 is there's something even better, which might not have been a move that you looked at first glance. It looks like a very well defended move, but
then I didn't see it. So now my last thought was f3 actually.
Exactly.
Oh, it is one. Oh, okay.
It is f3. That's what he played in the game. So it's one of those King's Indian breakthroughs that you sometimes sacrifice one or even two pawns to make sure that the files open up. And this is when our bishop comes into attack, and that's where the bishop is now strong. Would you take the rook on c1 now?
Yeah, that's the super big question which I'm thinking of right now. I mean, if you committed to this, you probably will take that rook. I don't see a far better spot for black's bishop here.
So maybe it's not about the bishop. There's another sacrifice.
My goodness, that is so nice.
What did you see?
So now the knight takes on e4.
Yeah, this is what happened in the game. So taking the rook was, of course, possible if you want to restore the material balance.
Oh, that's so crazy. But, and maybe even Wesley So thought like, okay, I'm fine with that. Exchange that.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the thing. This bishop is actually more important than that rook on c1.
Yeah.
Like if the rook wants to move, which is what happened, the rook did end up moving in the game, then that loses white even one more tempo to do our attack. So in case the knight gets captured, what was your plan?
Pardon?
What was your plan if the knight gets captured?
Yeah, absolutely. The rook goes to f1 check, and I mean that has to be checkmate somehow, right? But I don't know.
I mean it's a bit difficult to find the checkmate immediately, but even an activating bishop move with bishop e3 and some nice tactics.
Oh, these are some. Now I see it. Yeah, these are some very nice tactics.
Yeah. So all of these tactics now start to happen, and that's the part of the King's Indian where you have to think and calculate all of that, and you can't just play on instinct because there's just so many tactical opportunities. Next move is also a tactic.
How did you do that? I'm getting super interested in this opening out of a sudden, Svitlana. I feel weird. I don't know what you've done here with your smart
I feel
moves.
like it would be good for you because if you're someone who likes to attack, who likes to push pawns, this is exactly it. This is exactly
crazy. Anyway, so black to move.
Another tactic. Yeah.
Yeah. Ah. No, wait. No, we have to be a bit careful to not lose this bishop. I thought I can just take on g4, but then f7 takes, and I think we're not quick enough with that. No, we're not. No, there must be something better. Well, I'm looking at bishop to e3, but I don't see the big tactic here. That's just a move.
It's not bishop e3 yet, but it's a good. It will appear
happen
later. There's a tactic right away.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, why don't I see this? I guess it might really be rook taking f3.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this is another nice tactical idea. What I really like about the King's Indian is that when it works out so nicely. You see how every piece is like doing something. And at first it looks strange that we played some Rook F7, Queen F8. Like, what are these pieces doing there? But once the tactics start happening, you see exactly why these pieces are there and how they can really work together so well and bring this attack to life. And whenever this attack breaks through, then you will really notice that there's a big difference between all of black's pieces being there while all of white's pieces are kind of stuck on the queen side. And the same thing, if your attack fails, then you're really under defended on the queen side. So just don't make your attack fail, because there's no other option. So rook f3 is what happened. Nakamura continued his strong attack, and already white is technically lost because of this completely piece is completely dominating here on the king side.
Quite okay, yeah.
Then what do we do? What do we do now? Because you were worried about this bishop.
Yes, I'm a bit sad it's gone. So what happens to the original plan? I guess check f1. The king
check
goes
f1
to
is
g2. Good. Of course, the bishop cannot take because it's checkmate. So would love to get rid of this knight on d3.
We can use the same move we used earlier.
Yeah. Now bishop I see it. It's
That's what happened in the game.
Oh my god, I can see it. The whole system now.
So you know, it's all based on this move h3, which even was winning right away here. It's a super nice line too. There is now rook f2, which is, I mean, impossible. I don't know if any of them saw that.
What?
But you're like not letting the king come back like that. So let's say bishop f2, queen f2, and you can have a nice minor piece mate.
Oh my god, that is so awful. Wow.
So this was also winning, but I think the move rook f2 is a bit of a computer move. I'm not sure how you would see something like that and calculate it, but that's like, I rarely see like this minor piece mates, almost never.
Yeah.
And that was one of those nice variations.
Amazing.
But bishop e3 makes sense. You keep your h3 idea. This is what happened in the game.
The queen can go to h6, which is the nice idea about all of this.
That too. So you can combine h3 with queen coming there. So the game didn't last too much longer. White had to give up a piece here to open up to take the rook with his rook. But the attack continued. Knight here, king here. Now is what you mentioned.
Yeah.
Queen h6. That was one of our other ideas.
Oh my gosh.
White is a clear rook up, but he can't avoid the mate here.
Yeah.
So the king is just stuck. It's the escape squares are defended.
There's so many moves though, it's a bit difficult to find. Exactly, g5 is annoying, I think. But then there's the check. Now the king can go to 3 different spots again. When the king takes, it is... What's happening then? Oh, I see it. It's checkmate. It's knight to f5. If the rook takes, it's queen h3.
Yeah. Yeah, and if the king moves, then we can still
Yeah,
go queen h3.
I think,
Yeah,
and then knight to g3, checkmate.
nice. Also a nice mate.
Hmm.
So
How
yeah, in the
beautiful.
game, the king went here, but there's like this is already very tactical, and I mean this can be analyzed all day. But I will just show the way it ended,
Oh,
and
that's nice.
the
And
knight went here. The king is
h3
just
is
stuck.
protected.
The king is just stuck
Yeah.
on g4, and I feel like this is it's so rare that
What
you
a
get some like
mess.
huge king run like that, especially in such a nice win.
When
And
did
it
that happen? This is so cool.
ends off with another
2015.
rook
Oh
sacrifice
my god. Oh my gosh.
with a mate. So this is why I like this is a very memorable game for anyone who like plays the King's Indian,
Yeah.
because it's one of those games by top players in recent years that use the main line of the King's Indian. Nowadays there's many people who try to kind of avoid these main lines, because you have to know, like, if you could see this game, it's like, I don't know, 15 moves of theory or something like that, and
Yeah.
find all of these subtleties. So a lot of people avoid it and go for some other King's Indian setups. But this one was nice because it showed us like the very main line of the King's Indian, the typical plans for both sides. And here it just happened that I guess White made the first mistake and allowed this attack to go through. And yeah, that's usually how it goes in these lines, is whoever makes the mistake, whoever is just a bit too slow, um, then the other person can take over the initiative. But
Cool.
hopefully it showed you all the beauty and glory of the King's Indian, and you're now motivated to play it.
Most certainly. Okay, so now I have to ask you one last questions before we end the show.
Mhm.
If you at home also have, yeah, if you are a King's Indian player, you love this episode anyway, right? Because you're enjoying this opening so much. But if you have never played the King's Indian and you think like, oh yeah, I like this ideas, I like this tactical thing, I like this attacking style, how to start learning about the King's Indian?
How do I start learning about the King's Indian? Well, I'm sure there must be a ChessBase DVD course on it
Yeah,
by someone. I'm not sure if
probably
I'm not sure when
plenty.
it was released. Hmm?
Probably plenty. I will put some in the ChessBase news site so you can
Yeah,
check those out. And
yeah.
any book you could recommend too?
Mm, I didn't particularly learn it from a book.
Oh,
I'm sure there are books.
yeah.
Yeah, like maybe part of someone's series, like Dangerous Weapons
Uh-huh.
is a book series. But there's yeah, I'm sure there's some books on it. The way I like to do it is looking at the top players' games, because
Yes.
you get to see, such as this one, not only their huge theory, because they're obviously prepared it,
Yeah.
and they've kind of, whenever you look at top player games, you see all of their like hours of preparation with the engine. So you don't have to do that, because if they played something, you obviously still verify it, because maybe they just played it out of the blue. But generally, if you're watching some top level games, and they're playing fast, you can kind of know that this is the recent theory developments, and that they probably checked it with the engine, and that it's a nice line to also study and to try out. But mainly, yeah, the way to learn the King's Indian, as it is to learn any opening, is you learn some of the main ideas, which is what we did
Right now?
in this episode, which I think should be enough to at least get started.
Yeah.
And then you start playing it, which is what I usually recommend. You start playing it, you see what people play most often against you, you see where you have kind of problems. And if you have a problem somewhere, for example, you have a problem in the fianchetto, then you look back, you go back to either your course that you studied it from or the book that you studied it from,
Hmm.
and you check what it is that you're doing wrong there, and then you restart. So really, it's about knowing the main ideas and starting to play it, and that's how you get better at any opening.
Yeah, and I can absolutely confirm of what you just said. What was one of your the best ideas is to watch the top players in the mega database and check out the opening, all those moves. Exactly what you said, because they have prepared hours and hours and hours into this. And I heard this from Lilith Demchenko and Regina Pokorna, two super strong women titled players who I'm showing you a series sooner or later. Just you wait at home. And they mentioned the exact same thing. This is one of their main preparations for almost any opening, to look at the top players. Thank you so much for this super interesting episode, Svitlana. We will see each other soon enough. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking. Thanks for always having those nice comments. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.